The year is 1529, and the Ottoman Empire stands at the very summit of its might. You find yourself in Constantinople, the great capital on the Bosporus, where the call to prayer rises above the domes of the Hagia Sophia, and the Golden Horn bristles with ships. The city thrums with energy, markets packed with spices from the Indian Ocean, silks from Persia, furs from the steppes, and slaves from distant frontiers. The empire of Suleiman the Magnificent stretches farther than any Ottoman sultan before him, from the deserts of Arabia to the gates of Persia, from the mountains of Anatolia across the Balkans, all the way to the heart of Hungary. His armies number in the hundreds of thousands, his fleets control the Mediterranean, and his treasury overflows with the spoils of conquest. To the Ottomans, it seems that no barrier can withstand them. To their enemies, it seems that no frontier is safe. Suleiman himself, tall, regal, draped in brocade and crowned with a turban like a tower of silk, embodies this overwhelming power. His reign has already seen the empire expand at lightning speed. Belgrade captured in 1521, Rhodes taken in 1522, Hungary crushed at the Battle of Mohacs in 1526, where King Louis II was thrown from his horse and drowned in a river while his army was annihilated. The victory at Mohacs left Hungary in ruins, its throne contested, its defences shattered. For Suleiman the path westward lies open, and only one bastion remains to bar his way into the heart of Europe. Vienna, capital of the Habsburgs. The Habsburg dynasty, ruled by Ferdinand I, younger brother of Emperor Charles V, controls Austria, Bohemia, and the Holy Roman Empire's sprawling lands. But compared to Suleiman's empire, the Habsburg domains feel fractured and fragile. The Holy Roman Empire is a patchwork of quarrelling princes, each guarding his own territory more jealously than the unity of Christendom. Charles V himself is distracted, locked in wars with France, fighting Protestant rebels in Germany, and facing the constant threat of Ottoman naval power in the Mediterranean. Vienna, therefore, stands as both symbol and shield. If it falls, the road to southern Germany and beyond lies wide open. If it holds, the tide of Ottoman expansion is stemmed. You can sense the momentum in Constantinople as Suleiman declares his intention. Courtiers bow deeply, scribes rush to draft decrees, and horsemen gallop into the provinces with orders to muster troops. The empire begins to move like a living machine. From Anatolia comes seasoned cavalry, the Sipahis, with their lances and bows. From the Balkans come thousands of levies, carrying axes and spades for siege work. From the empire's elite corps, the Janissaries march men taken as Christian boys, converted and trained into the most feared infantry in the world, wielding muskets and discipline with equal ferocity. Engineers prepare massive cannons, each cast in bronze, designed to batter down walls that once seemed eternal. The scale is staggering. Chroniclers speak of over 100,000 men summoned, though the exact number is debated. Imagine it, an army so vast that villages empty to feed it. Rivers choke with its crossings, and roads vanish beneath the press of hooves and boots. The Ottomans have mastered logistics on a scale unmatched in their time, and yet even their system strains under the demands of such a campaign. Horses must be fed, wagons repaired, gunpowder transported in barrels, and grain gathered from provinces already stretched thin by years of war. The march to Vienna is not simply a military operation. It is a feat of organization that rivals the empire's greatest conquests. Why Vienna, you wonder, and why now? Suleiman has already secured much of Hungary, placing John Zapolia, a pliant local noble, on its throne as his vassal. But Ferdinand Habsburg claims Hungary as well, citing dynastic ties through marriage. For Suleiman, the invasion of Austria is both strategic and symbolic. To secure Hungary fully, to punish Ferdinand for his defiance, and to strike terror into the heart of Christian Europe. By seizing Vienna, Suleiman would demonstrate that no fortress, no capital, no dynasty is beyond his reach. Constantinople, once the bulwark of Byzantium, had fallen to his grandfather Mehmed II in 1453. Now 80 years later, the Ottomans seek to replicate that triumph against the heirs of the Holy Roman Empire. In the Imperial Council, voices warn of the risks. Vienna is far from Ottoman supply lines. its defences formidable, its climate harsh for an army accustomed to Anatolian summers. But Suleiman is undeterred. His reign is defined not by caution but by magnificence, and magnificence demands bold strokes. His titles: Padishah of the Three Continents, Shadow of God on earth, Lawgiver of the world, weigh upon him as both glory and responsibility. To falter now would tarnish his name, to triumph would make him immortal. As the spring of 1529 dawns, the campaign begins. Trumpets blare, drums thunder, and standards ripple in the wind. The Sultan himself rides at the head, his entourage glittering with gold and jewels, the very picture of imperial majesty. Behind him stretch endless ranks of soldiers, Sipahis with their horses, Janissaries with their muskets, engineers with their tools, peasants pressed into service with wagons and supplies. The roads of the Balkans groan beneath their weight, and villagers watch in awe and terror as the tide rolls westward. For those who witness it, the march of Suleiman's host is like the movement of the earth itself, slow, unstoppable, and crushing. The Christian world trembles. In Vienna, word of the advancing army sends shockwaves through the populace. Priests preach sermons of endurance and prayer. Citizens fortify walls, dig trenches, and gather supplies. Messengers race across Europe, begging for aid from princes distracted by their own rivalries. Some answer half-heartedly, others ignore the call. The defenders of Vienna know they will face the storm largely alone, yet they also know what is at stake. If Vienna falls, the gates to Germany are open, and the Ottoman tide may sweep all the way to the Rhine. And so, as the Ottoman host crosses the Danube and begins its advance through Hungary, the stage is set. The world's most powerful empire, led by one of history's most formidable rulers, has fixed its gaze on a single city. The Sultan's banners flutter with the crescent moon, his cannons rumble on creaking wagons, his janissaries march with silent discipline. The Habsburg capital waits, its walls braced, its people fearful yet resolute. The clash to come is not merely a siege of stone and mortar, but a contest of civilizations, faiths, and destinies. You can almost hear the drumbeat of history quickening. Suleiman rides westward, his gaze steady, his ambition vast. Behind him stretches the might of an empire that believes itself destined to conquer the world. Ahead lies Vienna, the last wall between the Ottomans and the heart of Europe. The storm has begun to gather, and soon the thunder will break. The march from Constantinople to the plains of Hungary begins with pomp and thunder, but before long it becomes a trial that would test even the strongest empire. You picture the Ottoman host spilling out of the capital in the spring of 1529, their banners unfurling under a pale sun, their drums beating like the pulse of the earth. The Sultan's retinue dazzles onlookers, robes of crimson and emerald, horses adorned with silver bridles, jeweled scimitars gleaming in the light. Behind the magnificence, however, comes the bulk of the army. Tens of thousands of soldiers, camp followers, engineers, smiths, cooks, servants and slaves. The column stretches for miles, a river of humanity moving westward, heavy with ambition. Yet almost at once, difficulties arise. The rains come early that year, pouring across the Balkans, turning roads into rivers of mud. Wagons sink axle deep, horses strain and stumble, men curse and slip with every step. Massive bronze cannons, the pride of the Ottoman siege train, prove especially burdensome. Each requires dozens of oxen to drag, and when the ground gives way beneath them, entire crews labour for hours just to move them a few paces forward. A march that should be swift slows to a crawl, and already whispers of ill omen stir in the ranks. Still, Suleiman presses on. His commanders drive the men with shouts and lashes, and the army lumbers forward through the muck. Supplies become a constant worry. Grain stored in depots, spoils in the wet, bread moulds before it can be distributed, and pack animals die in the quagmire. The sheer size of the army demands endless fodder, but the villages they pass are already stripped bare from previous campaigns. Foraging becomes plunder, and Hungarian peasants flee at the sight of Ottoman banners, leaving fields empty and wells poisoned. Hunger gnaws at the soldiers, even before battle begins. The Danube, the empire's lifeline into Central Europe, becomes a mixed blessing. Barges ferry supplies upriver, but swollen currents capsize them, drowning men and cargo alike. Rain lashes the decks, winds whip the sails, and food meant to feed thousands sinks into the depths. More than once, Suleiman's men must pause to rebuild bridges or drag rafts across flooded tributaries. Each delay saps morale and strengthens the resolve of the defenders waiting ahead. The campaign that began with glory is beginning to look cursed by mud and water. By midsummer, the army reaches Buda, the Hungarian capital seized 3 years earlier at Mohacs. Here, Suleiman pauses to install his client, John Zarpalia, more firmly on the throne, reaffirming him as the Ottomans' chosen king of Hungary. For Zarpalia, this is both salvation and humiliation. His crown exists only because the Sultan allows it. For Suleiman, it is a political maneuver, ensuring that Hungary remains a buffer state against the Habsburgs. But the presence of Ottoman troops in Buda also leaves scars. Soldiers plunder churches, seize supplies, and treat the city as spoils. The Hungarian people, already traumatized by Mohacs, find little comfort in their new overlord. From Buda, the road to Vienna lies open. But the march grows ever harsher. The weather refuses to cooperate. Rains return, heavier than before, pounding the earth into sludge. Chroniclers describe wagons abandoned, cannons left mired, and corpses lining the road where exhaustion or disease claimed their victims. Dysentery spreads through the camp, striking soldiers and servants alike. The mighty Ottoman army, so invincible in appearance, begins to rot from within. Yet Suleiman refuses to turn back. His will is iron, and his ambition relentless. Vienna must be reached, no matter the cost. You imagine the contrast vividly. On one hand, Suleiman, riding beneath a jewel-encrusted canopy, his robes dry, his guards immaculate. On the other, foot soldiers slogging knee-deep in mud, their bellies empty, their boots disintegrating. The gap between ruler and ruled is immense. But loyalty to the Sultan and fear of punishment drive the men onward. Even janissaries, usually disciplined, grumble among themselves. Their muskets rust in the damp, their powder spoiled, yet they are expected to fight with the same precision as ever. As they cross deeper into Hungary, resistance stiffens. Peasant militias torch their own villages to deny the Ottomans shelter. Habsburg garrisons launch ambushes from forests, striking supply trains before vanishing into the trees. Each skirmish bleeds the army, not in numbers but in spirit. By the time Suleiman's host reaches the Austrian frontier, tens of thousands of men have been lost, not to battle, but to mud, hunger, and disease. An army that began as a tide threatening to overwhelm Europe has already been reduced, its edges frayed before it even sights Vienna. And yet, the image of Ottoman might remains terrifying. From afar, smoke rises from burning villages. Refugees stream into Austria with tales of endless columns of soldiers, of cannon wheels groaning like thunder, of banners so numerous they blot the horizon. To the defenders of Vienna, the difficulties of Suleiman's march are invisible. All they see is an empire approaching, its appetite insatiable, its sultan determined. Fear spreads through the countryside like wildfire, driving peasants into the walled city with whatever belongings they can carry. The arrival of autumn brings no relief. The weather turns colder, the rains harsher, horses collapse in droves, their carcasses lining the roads, stinking in the damp air. Soldiers fall sick in waves, their bodies shivering beneath soaked tents. Supplies dwindle to the point of desperation. Stories circulate of men boiling leather straps for food. The magnificence of Constantinople feels far away now. In its place is a shivering, hungry army, still vast, still dangerous, but weary long before the true battle begins. Suleiman himself grows ill during the march, struck by fever that forces him to travel by litter rather than horseback. His presence, once a source of morale, becomes a reminder of the campaign's fragility. Yet even confined, he insists the march continue. To turn back would be unthinkable, a humiliation that would echo through Europe and Asia alike. Better to press on through mud and misery than to risk being remembered as a sultan who faltered. At last, in late September, the Ottoman vanguard crests the hills and sees the spires of Vienna rising above the Danube plain. The city lies before them, Encircled by medieval walls, its people huddled inside, its defenders braced for the storm. The journey has cost Suleiman dearly. Thousands of men dead, cannons abandoned, supplies exhausted, but the Sultan has reached his target. The march, plagued by hardship and disaster, has delivered him to the gates of the Habsburg capital. The siege is about to begin. You stand with the weary soldiers, mud clinging to their boots, their faces gaunt, their armor dulled by weeks of rain. Ahead, Vienna waits, its towers defiant, its banners fluttering. Behind, the long trail of corpses and wreckage marks the path of ambition. The mightiest army in the world has arrived, but it is not unbroken. The march to Vienna has been as much a battle as any to come, a struggle against weather, hunger, and time itself. Now the true test begins. Vienna in 1529 is no sprawling metropolis. It is a city of perhaps 12,000 souls, perched on the banks of the Danube, surrounded by walls that had already seen better centuries. Yet, as word of Suleiman's march filters across the countryside, Vienna becomes something more than a collection of houses, churches, and workshops. It becomes a fortress, the keystone and the arch of Christian Europe. If the Ottomans take it, the road to the heart of Germany will open, and the Holy Roman Empire itself could collapse. If it holds, the westward surge of the Ottomans will be checked. You feel the weight of that knowledge pressing down on every man, woman, and child inside the city's gates. The man charged with the defense is Count Nicholas von Salm, 70 years old, with decades of service behind him. His face is weathered, his body slowed by age, but his will is iron. Alongside him stands Wilhelm von Roggendorf, another seasoned commander. These two men, backed by only a few thousand soldiers and a mass of hastily armed townspeople, must withstand the might of an empire. Their first task is to make the city defensible. The medieval walls, thin and crumbling in places, were never designed to withstand the bronze cannons Suleiman is dragging through the mud. Urgently the defenders reinforce them with earthen ramparts, piling soil and timber behind stone to absorb the impact of shot. Every spare hand is pressed into labor. Inside the city, life transforms overnight. Citizens tear down outlying suburbs, burning houses, and barns that might provide cover to attackers. Women and children haul buckets of dirt to strengthen ramparts. Blacksmiths hammer out arrowheads, musket balls, and pike heads long into the night, sparks flying from their forges. Priests walk the streets, urging courage, promising heavenly reward for sacrifice. Fear is everywhere, but so is determination. You see it in the faces of bakers, clutching rusty halberds, apprentices sharpening blades, peasants dragging carts of stones to block gates. The Habsburg court knows the stakes as well. Emperor Charles V is absent, tied up in distant wars, but his brother Ferdinand gathers what troops he can spare and sends them to reinforce Vienna. Cavalry units from the empire arrive in trickles, along with Spanish and German mercenaries hardened by campaigns in Italy. Their numbers are pitiful compared to Suleiman's vast host, yet their presence stiffens morale. Soldiers accustomed to professional war bring discipline to the city's defense, teaching townsmen how to hold pikes steady, how to reload muskets swiftly, how to stand firm against cavalry charges that may never come. The city's fortifications themselves become characters in this story. The medieval walls, topped with battlements and towers, circle Vienna like a frail ring, their stones weathered and cracked. Beyond them lie moats, hastily deepened, filled with water diverted from nearby streams. Palisades rise in front of the gates, while cannon are positioned wherever platforms can bear them. Engineers dig trenches within the city, ready to collapse tunnels the Ottomans might attempt to dig beneath the walls. Every weakness is patched, every gap filled, yet still the walls look fragile against the storm that is coming. You walk the ramparts one evening, looking out across the plain where Suleiman's army will soon appear. The Danube glitters faintly in the distance, and the hills beyond are dark with autumn trees. Inside the walls, torches flicker as workers labor ceaselessly. The smell of smoke, sweat, and fear mingles in the air. From the cathedral spire, bells toll ceaselessly, calling citizens to prayer and duty. The city is braced like a man clenching his teeth before a blow. It is not only soldiers who prepare. Women fashion bandages, grind herbs for medicine, and cook meals for the garrison. Children carry water to laborers, chase after carts of stones, and sometimes simply stand wide-eyed at the sight of walls bristling with pikes and cannons. Every heart within Vienna feels the tension. Some whisper that surrender might save them from slaughter, but these voices are quickly silenced. Better to die defending than to submit. The siege is not only military, it is psychological. Religious fervor saturates the city. Priests parade relics through the streets, raising crucifixes high, chanting litanies to strengthen hearts. Citizens kneel in the mud, praying by candlelight, their voices rising into the night. To them, this is not merely a battle between armies, but a cosmic struggle. Christendom against Islam, the cross against the crescent. Each sermon, each prayer, becomes a weapon as vital as any sword. Faith binds the people to their walls as tightly as mortar binds stone. And yet, pragmatism lives alongside zeal. Ammunition is counted, food rationed, well secured. Vienna cannot outlast the Ottomans indefinitely. It can only resist until reinforcements arrive, or winter forces the enemy to retreat. The defenders know this, and they prepare accordingly. Caches of powder are hidden in cellars, granaries are sealed, and every corner of the city is combed for resources. What Vienna lacks in manpower, it must make up for in ingenuity and endurance. Meanwhile, messages fly outward to neighbouring states, carried by riders risking ambush in the forests. Appeals for aid reach Bavaria, Saxony, and the empire beyond. Some princes hesitate, fearing to commit troops, while others quietly cheer for Vienna's fall, hoping to weaken the Habsburgs. But a handful respond, dispatching small contingents to reinforce the beleaguered city. Each fresh arrival is greeted with cheers, each new musket or pike a precious addition to the defence. Here's your cheeky thought. Imagine being one of those mercenaries arriving in Vienna. So how many troops are inside, you ask? The commander answers, about 12,000 souls, half of them shopkeepers with pitchforks. You sigh, mutter a prayer, and wonder if your pay is truly worth this. But once the gates close, there is no leaving. Everyone becomes a defender, whether they came for coin or for country. The psychology of the siege begins even before the enemy arrives. Rumours swirl through the city, some claiming Suleiman has 200,000 men, others whispering that his cannons can shatter walls in a single blow. Mothers hush children with tales of janissaries storming cities. Fathers sharpen swords late into the night. Fear spreads, but it also hardens resolve. If the Ottomans come, Vienna will meet them not with submission but with steel. By early autumn, the preparations are complete. The walls, patched and reinforced, stand ready. The garrison, though small, is disciplined and determined. The people, terrified but united, cling to their faith and their leaders. And on the horizon, the earth itself begins to tremble with the approach of Suleiman's army. Drums echo faintly in the distance, like thunder on the march. Smoke rises from burning villages beyond the hills. The storm is coming, and Vienna waits behind its fragile walls. A city transformed into a fortress by desperation, faith and the certainty that survival will demand everything it has to give. The Siege of Vienna is about to begin, and the city knows that history will be written on its walls. The Ottomans enter Hungary in the summer of 1529, their columns winding like serpents across the sodden plains, and soon the march becomes a nightmare. The rains that began in spring show no sign of ending. Storm after storm lashes the land, soaking tents, rotting supplies, and turning every road into a sucking bog. Men and animals sink knee-deep in muck. Wagons snap their axles. Cannons, pride of the empire, are abandoned in swamps because even teams of oxen cannot drag them free. What had been envisioned as a show of unstoppable might becomes a struggle just to keep the army moving forward. You picture janissaries gritting their teeth as they haul carts with ropes, their famed discipline tested not by enemy steel but by mud and exhaustion. Hunger gnaws at the ranks. Provisions spoil in damp wagons, grain sprouts with mould before it can be baked into bread, and meat rots in the endless rain. The farther the army moves into Hungary, the less food can be gathered. Villages lie burned or empty, their inhabitants fled at the first sight of Ottoman scouts. Foraging parties return with little more than roots and thin cattle. Soldiers who once strutted proudly now stagger under empty stomachs. Their once bright armor dulls with rust. Their boots disintegrate in the mire. Their spirits sag beneath the weight of fatigue. Disease follows close behind. Dysentery spreads like wildfire through the crowded camps. Men doubled over in agony, their bodies weakened further by malnutrition. The smell of sickness mixes with the stench of rotting horseflesh, for animals die in droves on the sodden march. Pack horses collapse. Oxen founder. Camels brought from Anatolia perish in the cold mud. The loss of transport cripples supply lines, forcing soldiers to carry loads themselves, further sapping strength. Already, before a single arrow has flown at Vienna, thousands lie dead by the roadside, victims not of battle but of weather. And yet, Suleiman presses on. He cannot turn back, not after declaring his campaign to the world. To halt would mean humiliation, a blow to his aura of invincibility. He rides in a gilded litter, weakened by fever, yet still issuing commands with unwavering resolve. Chroniclers note his determination, his refusal to acknowledge the disasters piling up. For the Sultan, appearances matter as much as victories. Even if his army is weary and depleted, it must appear unstoppable, the very embodiment of divine destiny. The Danube, intended as a lifeline, becomes another trial. Supply barges are lashed by swollen currents and driven against banks. Whole shipments of powder and grain are lost, sinking beneath the waters. Bridges wash away, forcing engineers to rebuild them in torrents, each crossing costing time and lives. Soldiers curse as they drag rafts across raging tributaries, the river swallowing men who slip. The great artery of Central Europe becomes a graveyard for Ottoman supplies. Still, the army crawls forward. In the fields of Hungary, the Ottomans clash with scattered Habsburg forces and rebellious peasants. These skirmishes are small, but deadly. Hungarian horsemen strike supply trains, then vanish into forests. Villagers ambush foragers, armed with nothing more than scythes and hatred. The campaign is a march through hostile land, every mile contested, every loaf of bread bought in blood. Even the weather seems an enemy, punishing the invaders with merciless rain and cold. When Suleiman reaches Buda, he reasserts his control over Hungary by enthroning his vassal, John Zapoler. Yet the ceremony is a hollow victory. The city is battered, its people resentful, its fields barren. Soldiers plunder churches, seize stores of grain, and exact tribute from a population already broken. The gesture strengthens Ottoman claims, but it does nothing to ease the suffering of the army. Vienna still lies ahead, and the road to it is lined with hardship. By late September, the army finally crosses into Austrian territory. What began as perhaps 100,000 men is now tens of thousands fewer, the rest lost to disease, starvation and desertion. Cannons meant to smash Vienna's walls are mired or left behind, reducing the siege train drastically. Horses are so scarce that soldiers haul wagons themselves. Morale wavers, though fear of the Sultan keeps discipline from collapsing. For those still marching, every step feels like defiance against nature itself. You imagine the conversations in campfires damp with rain. One janissary grumbles, "We were promised glory, but we march in mud and filth." Another replies, "The Sultan wills it, so we endure." The words are loyal, but the tone is weary. Even the famed janissaries, elite and disciplined, are human after all. The psychological toll mounts. Soldiers whisper of bad omens, strange lights in the sky, animals behaving oddly, dreams of defeat. The more superstitious mutter that God or fate or both are against them. Officers crack down, punishing talk of ill luck, but they cannot silence the unease. Each day of rain feels like a curse, each lost cannon a sign of doom. Yet the march continues because it must. In the villages ahead, peasants flee into forests or into Vienna itself. Refugees crowd the city, bringing tales of Ottoman atrocities, swelling the fear within the walls. They describe endless columns of men, banners like forests, janissaries marching with drums and flutes. Though the reality is far grimmer, an army half-starved and ragged, the image terrifies the defenders. To them, the Ottomans are still an unstoppable tide, no matter how blooded the march has made them. By the time the Ottomans approach the Austrian frontier, the weather grows colder. Early snowflakes fall, shocking soldiers unprepared for such chill. Fires struggle against wet wood, tents collapse under icy winds. Men huddle together for warmth, their breath misting in the frosty air. Many perish silently in the night, their bodies stiff with cold by dawn. The march that began as a grand triumph now resembles a funeral procession. Yet Vienna lies ahead, its walls glinting in the distance, and the Sultan will not turn back. At last, in late September, the battered army crests the hills and sees Vienna rising from the plain. The sight electrifies the weary host. Drums thunder, trumpets blare, banners rise once more. Whatever the hardships, whatever the losses, they have arrived. The defenders watch from their ramparts, eyes wide, hearts pounding. They see not the misery of the march, but the sheer immensity of Suleiman's host, still vast enough to surround their fragile city. The stage is set. The empire's greatest army, weakened but not broken, has reached the walls of Vienna. The rains and mud have taken their toll, but the siege is about to begin. You stand among the soldiers, their clothes soaked, their bodies thin, their eyes burning with both exhaustion and resolve. Ahead lies a city determined to resist. Behind lies a trail of suffering that demands victory to justify it. The march is over. The battle is at hand. The great host of Suleiman has reached Vienna, but the Sultan's men are in no condition for triumph. From the moment they pitch their first tents on the plain, the enormity of their hardship is laid bare. Horses stumble into camp thin as reeds, wagons creak and collapse, and soldiers slump into the mud, their faces gaunt with hunger. The Ottoman force, still vast in number, is a shadow of what it was when it departed Constantinople. The march through rain and mud has wrung the strength from the army, before a single shot has been fired at the walls. Still the city must be taken, and the Ottomans begin their grim work. The opening bombardments proved disappointing. Suleiman had intended to bring his heaviest cannons, massive bronze monsters capable of smashing through stone, but most were lost to floods and quagmires along the Danube. What artillery remains is lighter, better suited for harassing fire than for shattering bastions. The great guns roar, echoing across the plains, but their balls sink harmlessly into earth and timber. Vienna's defenders, wise to Ottoman methods, have buttressed their walls with soil that swallows iron rather than splintering. For every crack the artillery opens, hundreds of citizens rush to reinforce with more dirt, stones, and timber. The siege becomes a contest of endurance rather than brute destruction. Frustrated, the Ottomans rely heavily on sapping. Their engineers, skilled from decades of sieges in the Balkans and the Mediterranean, set to work with picks and shovels, tunneling beneath Vienna's bastions. Each night, defenders place their ears to the ground, straining to hear the faint scrape of enemy tools. Countermines are dug hastily, and in those subterranean passages, men meet in choking darkness. Sometimes tunnels collapse in on themselves, suffocating dozens. Other times gunpowder blasts tear the earth open, shaking both sides. It is war fought beneath the feet, unseen but terrifying. The defenders do not remain passive. Von Salm orders constant sallies, small sorties meant to disrupt the besiegers. At night, doors open in the walls and raiding parties dash into Ottoman trenches, setting fire to timberworks, spiking cannons, and cutting down sappers before retreating under covering fire. These sorties cost lives, but they buy precious time. Each burned trench, each destroyed battery slows the Ottoman advance. Citizens of Vienna fight alongside mercenaries, wielding axes, torches, and buckets of sand to extinguish flames started by enemy shells. The whole city has become a garrison. Autumn settles over the siege with cruel resolve. The rains continue, joined now by biting winds. Ottoman tents, soaked for weeks, rot and collapse. Soldiers huddle beneath sodden cloaks, their breath steaming in the cold. Fires refuse to burn in drenched wood, and meals are reduced to scraps. Corpses of men and animals alike lie unburied in the mud, spreading pestilence through the camps. Even the Janissaries, usually unshakable, begin to mutter. They are thousands of miles from home, starving, sick, and forced to assault walls that stubbornly refuse to fall. Inside Vienna, suffering is no less real, but the mood is different. Rations are tight, but the defenders cling to hope. Bells toll daily, summoning citizens to prayer. Priests parade, relics along the ramparts blessing soldiers, urging courage. Women carry stones and buckets of water. Children gather firewood. Men labor to reinforce every breach. The city is scarred by bombardment, yet it still stands, and each day it remains unbroken, strengthens morale. Rumors circulate of reinforcements marching from the empire. Whether true or not, the hope keeps spirits alive. The Ottomans launch repeated assaults. Janissaries surge forward, scaling ladders, storming breaches, blasted open by mines. The defenders meet them with musket fire, pikes, and desperate courage. Boiling water and flaming pitch rain down from the walls. The fighting is savage, close, and unrelenting. Time and again, Ottoman banners appear atop crumbling walls, only to be torn down in bloody counterattacks. Corpses pile in the moats, and the fields outside Vienna become charnel grounds. Yet still Suleiman demands more attacks, unwilling to admit failure. The most dangerous moment comes when an Ottoman mine succeeds in blowing apart a section of wall. Smoke and dust fill the air as janissaries pour into the breach. Panic grips the defenders, but von Salm himself rides to the gap, sword in hand, rallying his men. With mercenaries and citizens alike, he drives the attackers back in brutal hand-to-hand combat. The breach is retaken, the enemy repelled, and the city saved once more. The cost is horrific, but the morale of Vienna soars. They have proved they can withstand even the fiercest onslaught. For the Ottomans, morale collapses as weather worsens. In early October, snow falls, an early bitter winter settling over Central Europe. Soldiers from Anatolia and Arabia, unaccustomed to such cold, shiver uncontrollably, their fingers numb on weapons. Supplies are exhausted, animals dead, wagons abandoned. Hunger becomes starvation, and disease spreads unchecked. Suleiman's once great host begins to unravel. He has lost tens of thousands not to enemy steel, but to rain, mud, hunger, and frost. The siege that was to demonstrate Ottoman invincibility has become a trial of misery. Whispers spread through camp that the Sultan should withdraw. Officers caution that further assaults are futile. Janissaries demand food before obedience. Even Suleiman, feverish and weakened, knows the truth. Vienna has not fallen, and winter will kill more men than the Habsburgs ever could. Reluctantly, the order is given. The siege is to be abandoned. The camp stirs with relief, though it is tinged with shame. To leave without victory is bitter, but survival demands retreat. On October 14, 1529, the Ottoman army begins its withdrawal. Tents are struck, trenches abandoned, and broken cannons left behind in the mud. The retreat is as miserable as the advance, snow and ice dogging every step. Soldiers stagger along frozen roads, their numbers dwindling with each mile. Vienna watches from its battered walls as the great host recedes, leaving behind thousands of dead and a landscape scarred by war. Bells ring through the city, citizens weeping with joy, their survival a miracle against all odds. The defenders, too, are exhausted. Their walls are shattered in places, their supplies nearly gone, their soldiers battered and wounded, but they endure, and endurance is victory. Vienna has not fallen. Europe has been spared an Ottoman conquest that might have swept into Germany and beyond. The Habsburgs hold their ground, and Suleiman returns to Constantinople with prestige diminished. Here's your cheeky aside. Imagine Suleiman's generals trying to spin this defeat. Well, we didn't take Vienna, but we gave them quite a scare. It is the ancient art of turning failure into propaganda, and though some believe it, the truth is obvious. The siege has failed. In the years that follow, Vienna's survival is remembered as one of Europe's great turning points. The Ottoman tide has been checked, if not reversed. Suleiman remains powerful, his empire vast, but the myth of his invincibility has cracked. For the defenders, the memory of those desperate weeks becomes legend, passed down in sermons, chronicles, and songs. Vienna stood when all expected it to fall, As you stand on the ramparts in the aftermath, the air crisp with winter, you look out at the abandoned trenches and broken ladders. The fields are littered with the wreckage of ambition, the mud hiding the bones of thousands who marched under the crescent moon. Vienna endures, scarred but proud. The siege of 1529 is over, but its legacy will shape the centuries to come. Vienna braces itself as the black banners of the Ottomans rise on the horizon. By the final days of September 1529, Suleiman's vanguard pours across the plains, Janissaries in their white felt caps marching in eerie silence, Sypassiers on horseback wheeling in formation, camp followers trailing with wagons and livestock. To the weary soldiers on the walls, it seems as if the earth itself is moving toward them, a dark sea of men, horses and tents unfurling across the fields. Trumpets blare, drums thunder, and the city's bells answer in defiance. The Siege of Vienna has begun. The defenders, barely 20,000 in all, including mercenaries, townsfolk, and peasants, stare down an army at least 3 or 4 times their size. Their commanders, Count Nicholas von Salm and Wilhelm von Roggendorf, walk the ramparts, urging calm, praising courage. Von Salm, though 70, carries himself with the energy of a man half his age, barking orders, pointing to weak spots, assigning men to watch the gates and towers. Vienna has no choice but to hold. The citizens know that if the Ottomans breach the walls, there will be no mercy. Stories of slaughter at Mohawks haunt their dreams. The Ottomans waste no time. Their engineers and labourers, practised in siegecraft, swarm forward with shovels and picks. They dig trenches, erect earthworks, and begin constructing batteries for their cannons. Even diminished by the disastrous march, the Ottoman artillery is formidable. Massive bronze guns, dragged across rivers and through endless mud, are wheeled into place, their barrels aimed squarely at Vienna's medieval walls. The first thunderclap of cannon fire shakes the city to its core. Stones tumble, dust clouds rise, windows rattle. The bombardment has begun, and with it the relentless test of Vienna's endurance. Yet the walls hold better than Suleiman hoped. Unlike the soaring fortresses of the Mediterranean, Vienna's walls are thick with earth and timber hastily packed behind stone. The cannonballs slam into them, but instead of shattering, the walls absorb the blows, the earth giving way but not collapsing. Each night citizens and soldiers rush to repair damage, piling more soil, driving in more stakes, reinforcing weak spots with beams. Fires from the bombardment are beaten out by bucket brigades, smoke choking the air but never consuming the city. The Ottomans hurl iron and fire, but Vienna refuses to crumble. So the siege shifts to another form of warfare, the mines. Ottoman sappers dig tunnels toward the walls, their work hidden beneath wooden screens and earthworks. They haul baskets of soil, scrape with picks, and shore up shafts with timber. Their goal is to plant barrels of powder beneath the foundations, to blast open breaches that cannon cannot manage. The defenders know the danger well. At night, they press their ears to the ground, listening for the faint scrape of digging. When a tunnel is suspected, countermines are dug from inside the city. Underground in damp darkness lit only by torches, men fight not with swords but with picks and shovels, collapsing tunnels, flooding shafts and sometimes clashing directly in brutal smoky hand-to-hand combat. Above ground, skirmishes rage constantly. The defenders launch sorties through postern gates, dashing into Ottoman trenches with torches and axes, spiking cannons, and setting fire to siege works before retreating inside the walls. Each sally is costly. Men cut down by Janissary fire, or trapped outside the gates, but the damage they inflict slows the Ottoman progress. From the walls, crossbowmen and arquebusiers rain fire down on enemy engineers, forcing them to labour under shields of wicker and wood. The siege becomes a grim dance of attack and counterattack, day after day, night after night, neither side yielding. The weather turns against the Ottomans again. Cold autumn rains drench the trenches, flooding tunnels, turning camps into swamps. Tents collapse under the weight of water. Fires sputter. Soldiers shiver in sodden clothes. Horses die in the mud, their carcasses stinking in the camp. Supplies grow scarcer, bread rationed, meat almost non-existent. Soldiers fall ill by the thousands, disease sweeping through ranks already weakened by the march. In contrast, the defenders, though hungry and exhausted, are sheltered within walls, their supplies carefully rationed, their morale bolstered by the knowledge that winter is their ally. Inside Vienna, fear mingles with resilience. Bells toll each morning and evening, calling citizens to prayer and labour. Priests carry relics along the ramparts, blessing soldiers, urging them to remember that God stands with them. Women and children carry stones to reinforce walls, haul water to douse fires, and tend to the wounded. The city lives as one organism, every hand committed to survival. Rumours fly, some whisper that reinforcements are coming, others that none will arrive, but hope persists, fueled by faith and the visible fact that despite weeks of assault, the Ottomans have not broken through. Then comes October, and with it, the final assaults. Ottoman guns hammer relentlessly, opening breaches in the walls. Janissaries, disciplined and fearless, surge forward in waves, ladders braced against shattered stone, drums pound, war cries rise, and the defenders brace themselves with pikes and muskets. The fighting at the breaches is savage. Men clash in close quarters, blades flashing, muskets firing at point-blank range. Citizens join soldiers, hurling stones, boiling water and flaming pitch onto attackers. The Janissaries fight with precision, but each time they gain ground, counterattacks hurl them back. The dead pile high in breaches, the moats choked with corpses. One particularly ferocious assault nearly overwhelms the city. Ottoman miners succeed in detonating a charge beneath a section of wall, blasting open a gap wide enough for hundreds to pour through. Janissaries storm the breach, their flags rising amid the smoke. Panic surges through Vienna, defenders wavering. But von Salm rallies them, riding to the breach despite his age, his voice carrying above the din. Reinforcements rush in, pikes bristling, muskets cracking, and slowly, painfully, the tide turns. The Janissaries are driven back, their bodies littering the ruins of the wall they had almost taken. The defenders cheer, but the victory is fragile, their exhaustion total. Day after day, the assaults continue. Each one saps Ottoman strength further, and each one leaves Vienna battered but unbroken. The rains worsen, turning to sleet. Snowflakes fall on weary men in trenches, their hands too numb to grip weapons, their bellies empty. Suleiman knows the truth. He does not wish to speak. His army is failing, not because of the defenders' numbers, but because of weather, hunger, and time. Winter is coming, and if he lingers, his army will perish. At last, in mid-October, the assaults cease. The Janissaries withdraw to camp, their drums silent. Smoke still rises from the walls, but no fresh attack comes. Within Vienna, defenders wait anxiously, fearing another storm, but instead, word spreads, Suleiman is retreating, supplies are gone, morale broken, the season too late. On October 14, the Ottomans lift the siege, packing what remains of their artillery, abandoning wagons, leaving thousands of dead behind. The greatest army in the world turns away from Vienna, defeated not in battle alone, but by nature itself. The relief inside the city is indescribable. Bells ring, citizens weep, soldiers embrace. The walls stand scarred, breaches gaping, houses burned, but Vienna endures. Its survival becomes legend, celebrated across Europe as the turning point that halted Ottoman expansion into the heart of the continent. For Suleiman, it is a bitter setback, his aura of invincibility tarnished. For the defenders, it is a miracle, proof that faith and endurance can withstand even the mightiest empire. You stand on the battered walls, looking out at the abandoned Ottoman trenches, the fields littered with broken ladders, shattered cannons, and corpses half buried in mud. The storm has passed, leaving silence behind. Vienna has survived the test, and in doing so it has secured its place in history as the city that stood against the Sultan. The siege has ended, but its echoes will shape Europe for centuries to come. When Suleiman finally orders his army to lift the siege, Vienna is left battered, but standing. The decision comes not from weakness of will, but from sheer necessity. The Ottomans, reduced by disease, Frost and hunger cannot linger. Every passing day threatens to consume more men than battle itself. On the morning of October 14, 1529, the great camp begins to stir with unusual haste. Tents are struck, wagons hurriedly loaded, wounded abandoned, and campfires quenched. The once mighty host begins to flow eastward, like a dark river retreating from a dam, for the defenders watching from Vienna's walls. It is the first unmistakable sign of salvation. Yet, retreat does not mean peace. As the Ottomans withdraw, they lash out with fury. Villages along the Danube are plundered and burned, crops seized, livestock driven off, refugees flee in terror, streaming into Vienna with stories of atrocities, churches desecrated, peasants slaughtered, women carried into captivity. The retreating army leaves a scarred landscape in its wake, ensuring that even in defeat, it inflicts pain. This is not a quiet withdrawal, but a campaign of vengeance, a reminder that the empire remains dangerous even in failure. The weather makes the retreat catastrophic. October snow falls thick and early, coating the ground in ice. Roads vanish beneath drifts. Rivers freeze at their edges, and winds whip through the ranks of soldiers. Men already weakened by hunger collapse in the snow and are left behind. Horses die in staggering numbers, their carcasses abandoned to scavengers. Wagons snap under the strain, cannons sink into icy mud, and supplies vanish into the frozen ground. The retreat is a march of misery, as punishing as any battle, and thousands more perish before the army reaches friendlier lands. Suleiman himself suffers. Racked with fever, he travels in a covered litter, hidden from the worst of the cold but not immune to its weight. Chroniclers describe him as gaunt, his once imposing figure reduced by illness, yet still commanding absolute obedience. His silence during the retreat unsettles his men. They sense that the great sultan, who had never before turned back in defeat, feels the sting of failure. His aura of invincibility, carefully cultivated through decades of victory, has inside Vienna. The contrast is stark. The city celebrates its survival, with bells ringing from every tower. Priests lead processions of thanksgiving, relics carried high, hymns rising into frosty air. Citizens weep openly, clasping one another in the streets. Children chase each other through rubble-strewn alleys, their laughter mingling with the sound of hammers as workers begin repairing breaches. The relief is immense, the joy overwhelming, yet the scars are plain. Walls shattered, houses burned, food stores nearly empty, and hundreds of dead lying in hastily dug graves. Survival feels miraculous, but it has come at a cost. The defenders themselves are transformed into heroes. Von Salm, though grievously injured during the siege, is celebrated as the savior of Vienna. His leadership, his relentless presence on the walls, and his refusal to surrender are praised in chronicles and sermons. Mercenaries and peasants alike, who fought with him, are honored. The city, once doubting its ability to resist, now knows it has stood against the greatest army of the age and endured. The legend of Vienna's defiance is born in these days of relief. Across Europe, news spreads quickly. Messengers ride through Germany, Italy, and France with tales of the siege. The Holy Roman Empire, divided by Protestant and Catholic strife, finds rare unity in celebrating Vienna's defense. Pope Clement VII proclaims it a victory of Christendom over Islam. Princes who had hesitated to send aid now boast of their prayers, claiming a share in the triumph. Even far-off England and Spain hear the news with relief. Vienna's survival reassures all of Europe that the Ottoman tide can be resisted, that the crescent moon does not guarantee conquest. For Suleiman, the retreat is framed differently. In Constantinople, scribes craft proclamations emphasizing the hardships of weather rather than defeat. The Sultan is said to have tested Vienna, not failed against it. His authority remains immense, his empire vast, but the campaign's disappointment cannot be hidden. The image of Ottoman invincibility is shaken. Rivals in Persia and Europe note the crack, sensing that even the Magnificent can be checked. The failure to take Vienna will haunt Suleiman's later campaigns, a reminder that ambition has limits. The aftermath for Hungary is grim. John Zapolia remains Suleiman's vassal, clinging to his throne with Ottoman backing, but his kingdom is a battlefield ravaged by marching armies. Peasants suffer worst of all, caught between Habsburg garrisons demanding loyalty and Ottoman raiders punishing defiance. Fields lie fallow, villages charred, churches looted. The Hungarian plain becomes a wasteland of ashes, its people weary of promises from kings and sultans alike. Here's your cheeky aside. Imagine being one of those peasants. 1 month, you swear allegiance to a Habsburg garrison commander. The next, an Ottoman cavalry patrol shows up, demanding grain. If you refuse, you're hanged. If you comply, you're a traitor to the other side. Loyalty is less about politics than about survival, and survival is nearly impossible when giants trample your fields. Vienna, though triumphant, remains anxious. The siege has shown how vulnerable the city is, its walls outdated, its supplies meagre. Plans begin almost immediately to strengthen its defences, to build bastions and moats in the new Italian style that can resist artillery more effectively. The citizens know the Ottomans will return. The empire is too vast, its ambition too great for this to be the end. Vienna has survived once, but no one believes the danger is gone. The broader European balance shifts as well. The Habsburgs emerge stronger, their prestige enhanced by Vienna's survival. Ferdinand, once scrambling to hold his lands, now boasts of his defence against Suleiman. Charles V, engaged in his endless wars elsewhere, points to Vienna as proof of divine favour. The Holy Roman Empire, fractured though it remains, takes pride in the stand. The Ottomans, still formidable, are no longer seen as unstoppable. A psychological barrier has been broken. For the people of Vienna, memory lingers long after the smoke clears. Songs are composed, chronicles written, paintings commissioned. Children who lived through the siege grow up recounting tales of bombardments, breaches, and prayers answered. The names of von Salm and Roggendorf are etched into stone. Every scar on the walls becomes part of the city's identity. The siege is not merely an episode of war, it becomes Vienna's defining legend, shaping how it sees itself for centuries. And so, as Suleiman's weary host limps back toward Constantinople, the story of Vienna hardens into myth. The city that was supposed to fall has stood, and in doing so, it has drawn a line across Europe. The Ottomans remain mighty, but they are not invincible. The Habsburgs remain divided, but they are not helpless. The siege of 1529 has ended, but its legacy is only beginning. You stand once more on Vienna's ramparts, the winter sun pale above you, the fields outside littered with broken ladders, shattered trenches, and the bones of the fallen. Silence reigns now where drums once thundered. The people within the city breathe easier, though they know storms may come again. For now, Vienna stands, and in standing it has altered the course of history. The scars of the siege linger long after the last Ottoman soldier has vanished over the horizon. Vienna, though victorious, feels like a city half ruined. Its walls gape with breaches hastily patched with timber and earth. Houses closest to the ramparts lie collapsed from bombardment, and the stench of death clings to alleys where bodies were buried in shallow graves. Yet, within the ruin a fierce pride grows. The people know they faced the greatest army in the world, and endured. That sense of survival becomes a new identity for Vienna, binding its citizens with a memory of unity and defiance. The Habsburg authorities seize the moment to reinforce their legitimacy. Ferdinand, though absent during the siege, wastes no time in presenting himself as the protector of Christendom. Imperial proclamations declare that his house stood against the Ottoman tide. Across Europe, poets and priests echo the message. Vienna was not merely a city saved, but a bulwark that shielded the continent. In cathedrals from Madrid to Krakow, prayers of thanksgiving are offered. For a fractured Christendom, torn by Protestant and Catholic strife, Vienna becomes a rare symbol that all can celebrate. Still, the city itself must recover. Winter closes in as survivors patch roofs, rebuild granaries, and ration the little food that remains. The countryside, ravaged by the Ottoman march and retreat, cannot supply what is needed. Refugees flood in from burned villages, swelling the city's numbers, their presence a constant reminder of devastation beyond the walls. Disease threatens, and hunger gnaws, but morale remains strong. The memory of survival steals even the starving. To complain is to dishonor those who fell on the walls. The rebuilding quickly takes on a military focus. Engineers from Italy are summoned to redesign Vienna's fortifications in the new Tres Italienne style. Low-angled bastions capable of withstanding cannon fire. The lesson of 1529 is plain. Medieval walls are no longer enough. Earth and stone must be reshaped for the age of gunpowder. Citizens labor through the cold, dragging soil, setting foundations, laying timber, driven by the knowledge that the Ottomans will surely return. Every hammer strike is both reconstruction and preparation. Here's your cheeky aside. Imagine the city council meetings. Item 1, repairing the market roof. Item 2, rebuilding homes. Item 3, oh yes, let's redesign the entire city into a fortress because the Sultan might drop by again. Practical concerns blur into existential ones when your neighbor is the largest empire in the world. While Vienna rebuilds, Suleiman broods in Constantinople. Official proclamations blame weather and supply problems, but the truth gnaws at the court. The Sultan has suffered his first undeniable failure. His aura of inevitability is tarnished, and whispers spread in European courts that the Ottoman tide can be resisted. Diplomats in Venice, Rome and Paris speak of a turning of the age. Even in Persia, rivals take note. Seeing that the Ottoman war machine is not unstoppable, Suleiman remains formidable, but his prestige has been wounded. The psychological victory for Europe cannot be overstated. For decades the Ottomans seemed an inexorable force, swallowing territory year after year. The fall of Constantinople in 1453, the conquest of Belgrade in 1521, the annihilation of Hungary at Mohacs in 1526, each had fueled terror. Now, at Vienna, the momentum falters. Europe begins to breathe, if only slightly, seeing that courage, walls and winter can keck even the magnificent. The defense of Vienna becomes not just a military success, but a myth of endurance that resonates across Christendom. Within the city, legends are born. Stories of Count von Salm riding to the breaches despite his age spread rapidly. Tales of citizens hurling boiling oil, of priests carrying relics along the walls, of women dragging cannons into place. All become part of the narrative. Whether every detail is true matters less than the message. Vienna stood because everyone fought. The siege enters collective memory as a story of unity, where class and rank dissolved into shared survival. The Ottomans, too, carry memories. Survivors of the march speak of endless rain, of corpses littering the road, of frostbite and starvation. Janissaries mutter that the Sultan demanded the impossible, driving them into mud and snow for no gain, though their discipline remains. Their faith in invincibility is shaken. The Ottoman elite may spin the retreat as strategic, but the men who froze and starved know otherwise. The myth of invulnerability is cracked inside the empire itself. For Hungary, the aftermath is devastation. Once the battlefield between Ottomans and Habsburgs, it now lies broken. Villages burned, fields untended, churches looted. The land bleeds from both conquerors. John Zapolya remains Suleiman's puppet king, clinging to power with Ottoman backing, while Ferdinand presses his own claim. The Hungarian plain becomes a wasteland, its people trapped between two powers, suffering endlessly for a throne they do not care about. In their misery, the Siege of Vienna is not a triumph, but another chapter of torment. As months pass, Vienna's reputation grows. Foreign visitors arrive to marvel at the battered walls, to hear stories of desperate knights and miraculous escapes. Chroniclers put pen to parchment, immortalizing the siege. Painters depict janissaries storming breaches, defenders standing resolute. The image of Vienna as the bulwark of Christendom spreads across Europe, shaping political alliances, inspiring sermons, and warning future generations of the Ottoman threat. But beneath the pride lies unease. Everyone knows Suleiman will not accept this defeat forever. The Ottomans remain rich, vast, and powerful. Vienna has survived once, but what of the next attempt? The fear lingers in every council meeting, every sermon, every dream. Children grow up hearing both pride and dread in the same breath. We stood, but they will return. and return they eventually will. Decades later, in 1683. But for now, in the wake of 1529, Vienna basks in its unlikely triumph. Its people patch their wounds, rebuild their homes, and tell their stories, each one a thread in the tapestry of survival. They know history has pivoted here, on their walls, in their mud, beneath their prayers. They do not call it destiny, but they know it feels like one. You stand once more on the ramparts as winter sets in. Snow dusts the broken stones, the air crisp and still. Below, the plain lies empty, the trenches abandoned, the enemy gone. The silence feels vast, almost holy. The siege is over, but its memory will never fade. Vienna has been tested, and in its endurance it has changed the course of empires. The failure of the siege reverberates far beyond Vienna's walls. In Constantinople, Suleiman returns to a court that greets him with loyalty, but whispers behind veils. His chroniclers labour furiously to frame the campaign as a strategic withdrawal, a noble testing of the city rather than a failed conquest. The official narrative blames the weather, the swollen rivers, the mud, the early snow forces of nature that even the mightiest empire cannot overcome. And in part, this is true. Yet beneath the silks and proclamations, everyone knows what has happened. The Magnificent has met a wall that would not yield. In Europe, the news spreads with lightning speed. Messengers gallop through the Holy Roman Empire, carrying word of Vienna's survival. Priests seize on the story, thundering from pulpits that God himself shielded Christendom. Broadsheets depict Suleiman as humbled, his banners torn, his army broken by divine will. Even princes distracted by religious conflict pause to celebrate. For once Protestants and Catholics alike find common cause. Vienna endured, and the Ottoman tide has been checked. Across Europe, the siege becomes a rallying point, a reminder that unity, however fleeting, can achieve miracles. For Ferdinand of Habsburg, the siege is both vindication and opportunity. Though absent during the defense, he claims credit as the city's protector, parading himself as the champion who stood against the Sultan. He uses the victory to consolidate his authority in Austria and to strengthen his claim to Hungary. His prestige soars, and the survival of Vienna cements the Habsburgs as the dynasty destined to resist Ottoman expansion. In Spain, his brother Charles V, Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, also rejoices. The narrow escape at Vienna allows him to turn his attention back to France and Protestant unrest without fear of imminent Ottoman invasion. But Hungary, caught in the middle, bleeds. John Zarpaglia, Suleiman's puppet king, clings to his throne, but his kingdom is ravaged. Villages lie burned, fields untended, famine spreads. The Hungarian people, pawns in the struggle between Ottomans and Habsburgs, suffer endlessly. To them, Vienna's survival is no salvation, for Ottoman raids continue and Habsburg taxes press down. Their land is a battlefield, their lives consumed in the contest of empires. The siege may have been decided, but the war for Hungary drags on, brutal and unrelenting. Inside the Ottoman Empire, the soldiers who survived the march whisper bitterly. They remember the mud that swallowed cannons, the rains that spoiled grain, the frost that froze comrades stiff in their sleep. They grumble that their sultan demanded the impossible, driving them to the edge of death for no reward. The Janissaries, once unshakable, have seen defeat. Though their discipline remains, the illusion of invincibility has cracked. The siege has not destroyed the Ottoman war machine, but it has wounded its pride. Here's your cheeky aside. Picture the Janissaries around a campfire, back in Constantinople. One sighs, "We fought the Hungarians, the Austrians, the weather, and the mud." The mud won. Sometimes the most devastating enemy is not a man with a sword, but the sky above and the earth beneath. For Vienna, the siege becomes legend, almost instantly. Songs are written of the defenders who hurled back wave after wave of Janissaries. Sermons praise the citizens who carried stones and water alongside mercenaries. Children grow up hearing tales of Count von Salm rallying men at the breaches, of relics paraded along the walls, of God's hand steadying the city. Every scar on the ramparts becomes a sacred mark, proof of divine favour. Vienna is no longer just a city. It is the bulwark of Christendom, a fortress whose endurance inspires the continent. The cultural memory spreads outward. Painters depict the siege in lurid detail, the vast Ottoman camp sprawling across the plain, the breaches smoking, the defenders braced with pikes. Chroniclers describe the courage of peasants who fought like soldiers, the resolve of priests who blessed men even as cannonballs crashed nearby. The narrative is embellished, polished, turned into myth. The reality, muddy, bloody, chaotic, is transformed into a story of unity and heroism. Vienna's survival is less about chance and circumstance than about destiny, at least in the retelling. In the decades that follow, Vienna's defences are rebuilt with new vigour. Italian engineers oversee the construction of bastion fortifications, angular walls capable of deflecting cannon fire. Moats are deepened, gates reinforced, supplies stockpiled. The lesson of 1529 is clear. The Ottomans will return, and when they do, Vienna must be ready. The scars of the siege drive innovation, transforming the city into one of Europe's strongest fortresses. Fear, turned to preparation, becomes a form of resilience. The broader geopolitical consequences unfold slowly. Suleiman, though still powerful, does not again attempt such a deep strike into Central Europe. Instead, the Ottomans focus on consolidating control in Hungary and waging wars in the Mediterranean and against Persia. The Siege of Vienna has revealed the logistical limits of the empire. Its armies, mighty though they are, cannot sustain themselves so far from supply bases, especially in hostile climates. The dream of sweeping into Germany remains just that, a dream. The empire must content itself with its vast holdings rather than endless expansion. For Europe, the siege marks a psychological turning point. Until 1529, the Ottomans seemed unstoppable, swallowing kingdom after kingdom. After Vienna, a sliver of confidence returns. The Habsburgs begin to see themselves not as doomed defenders but as potential victors. Other powers, though still wary, begin to imagine that the Ottoman tide can be checked. The balance of fear shifts slightly, and in that shift lies the seed of future resistance. Yet the Ottomans remain a threat. Their fleets dominate the Mediterranean. Their armies still menace Hungary. Their wealth still dwarfs most of Europe's. The siege has not destroyed them, only humbled them. The Sultan continues to reign magnificently, his court still resplendent, his armies still feared. But Vienna has shown that even the greatest empire can falter, and that faltering becomes a shadow that follows Suleiman to the end of his reign. You stand once more on the walls of Vienna, looking out over the plain where the trenches once sprawled. Snow has covered the scars, but the memory lingers. The fields beyond are silent now, yet you can still hear echoes of drums and cannon, of cries and prayers. The siege is over, but its legacy is alive. It will shape Europe's confidence, Ottoman ambitions, and the destiny of empires for centuries. Vienna stood, and in standing, it altered the course of history. The retreat from Vienna in 1529 does not end with the Ottomans simply vanishing into the mist. It becomes, instead, a second campaign of misery. Suleiman's vast host, once envisioned as the spear point that would pierce Central Europe, now staggers back through the same swamps and valleys it had conquered only weeks earlier. The rains continue unabated, soaking soldiers to the bone, turning fields into seas of mud. Wagons laden with what remains of powder and food sink axle deep, abandoned where they stand. Horses, already gaunt, collapse by the hundreds. The once mighty army shrinks with every mile, consumed not by enemy fire but by exhaustion and hunger. The Danube, which had failed to sustain the advance, now torments the retreat. Barges overloaded with wounded capsize in swollen waters, drowning men who had survived the siege. Ice begins to creep along the riverbanks, the first sign of an early and brutal winter. Crossing points become death traps, with rafts overturning, soldiers swept away in icy torrents. Chroniclers describe the retreat as more terrible than the siege itself, a long trail of corpses marking the way back east. Inside the army, discipline frays. Janissaries, still obedient, mutter about the futility of their suffering. Auxiliary troops desert in droves, melting into forests or slipping back toward their villages. Camp followers, Women, children, servants die in alarming numbers, their bodies left where they fall, frozen in grotesque postures. Even the elite cavalry, once the pride of the empire, looks ragged and broken, their armor rusted, their lances discarded to lighten loads. What had begun as the march of a juggernaut now looks like the slow disintegration of a defeated horde. Suleiman himself remains shrouded in silence. Fever keeps him confined to his litter, his once majestic figure hidden behind veils. His commanders dare not speak openly of failure, but their faces betray despair. The Sultan's refusal to turn his army around earlier has cost thousands of lives, and though none will say it, resentment smoulders. The Magnificent is still revered, still feared, but the sheen of invincibility has dulled. Even empires built on conquest must bow to mud, frost and hunger. Meanwhile, the people of Austria and Hungary endure the vengeance of retreating soldiers. Villages are burned in rage, crops seized without payment, peasants slaughtered for resisting, churches are desecrated, bells stolen, livestock driven off. Refugees stagger toward Vienna, bringing tales of atrocities that chill the blood. For these people, the siege is not over. It continues in the destruction left behind. The Ottomans may have failed to take the city, but they ensure the countryside pays the price for their humiliation. In Vienna itself, the mood is jubilant, but cautious. Bells ring daily. Sermons proclaim divine favor, but commanders warn that vigilance must not slacken. The walls, though scarred, stand as symbols of survival. Engineers begin immediate plans for stronger bastions, convinced that the Ottomans will return. Families rebuild homes destroyed by cannon fire. Merchants reopen shops, and peasants return to till fields near the city. Yet the memory of terror lingers in every glance at the horizon. Children who huddled in cellars during bombardments grow up with nightmares of drums and war cries. Survival has left scars deeper than stone. Across Europe, Vienna's defiance inspires awe. Chronicles describe the siege as a turning point, the moment when Christendom realized the Ottomans were not unstoppable. Pamphlets circulate in Germany and Italy, praising the courage of the defenders. Even Protestant leaders, normally hostile to Habsburg power, celebrate the city's survival as proof that Europe itself can endure. The memory of Mohacs fades in the glow of Vienna's triumph, and Suleiman, once feared as invincible, is now spoken of with cautious defiance. Yet not all Europeans celebrate equally. Some princes grumble that Vienna's defense only strengthens Habsburg authority, giving Ferdinand leverage in his endless disputes with Protestant lords. Others quietly wonder whether the Ottomans might still serve as useful counterweights against their rivals. Politics remains politics, even in the shadow of salvation. Vienna is praised, but alliances remain fragile. Hungary continues to bleed. The land becomes a no-man's land, contested between Habsburg garrisons and Ottoman raiders. Villages pay tribute to one side, only to be punished by the other. The peasantry grows ever more desperate, trapped in a cycle of war that offers no end. For them, Vienna's survival is meaningless. Their suffering deepens regardless of which banner flies overhead. The siege may have defined history for Europe, but for Hungary, it is just another disaster in an endless chain. Here's your cheeky aside. Imagine being a Hungarian farmer in 1530. Last year the Ottomans burned your barn. This year, Habsburg tax collectors demand tribute for defending you. You sigh, scratch your head, and wonder which empire you're supposed to thank while your fields lie barren. Sometimes survival means little more than enduring the greed of those who claim to protect you. The Ottoman Empire, for its part, remains vast and mighty, but Vienna marks a shift. The logistical nightmare of the campaign proves the limits of expansion into Central Europe. Suleiman still wins great victories in the Mediterranean and against Persia, but the dream of conquering Germany fades. Vienna's survival sets a boundary, not just physical, but psychological. The Ottomans can dominate the Balkans, Hungary, and the seas, but Central Europe will not fall so easily. The line has been drawn. For the defenders of Vienna, the line becomes legend. Songs celebrate Count von Salm, the aged commander who held firm at the breaches. Tales circulate of priests blessing muskets, of women pouring boiling pitch on attackers, of children carrying water to quench fires. These stories, repeated in homes and churches, fuse into myth. Vienna is no longer just a city, it is a symbol of resistance. Every scar on its walls becomes proof of endurance, every memory of hunger, a badge of honor. And so, in the winter of 1529-30, as the Ottomans limp home through snow-clad valleys, Europe begins to imagine a different future. The Sultan remains mighty, his armies formidable, but he is not invincible. The myth of Ottoman inevitability has cracked. Vienna's survival offers a glimmer of hope to those who fear conquest, a story of defiance to be told for centuries. You stand again on Vienna's ramparts, the snow crisp underfoot, the plain beyond empty at last. The silence feels profound, as though the land itself is resting after torment. The breaches in the wall gape like wounds, but behind them, life stirs again. Merchants haggle, children play, priests chant hymns of thanksgiving. Vienna has endured. The siege is over, the invincible has been checked, and the world will never look quite the same. The winter after the siege arrives with bitter swiftness. Snow buries the Austrian plains where Suleiman's trenches once sprawled, covering broken ladders, shattered cannons, and the bones of thousands who never made it home. For Vienna, the snow feels like a blanket of peace at last, muffling the memory of drums and bombardments. For the Ottomans retreating through Hungary, it is a shroud of misery, claiming stragglers by the hundreds as frostbite and hunger gnaw them into silence. By the time the survivors reach friendly territory, the proud army that set out from Constantinople is half the size it once was, reduced not by battle but by the cruelty of nature. In Vienna, the aftermath is less finality than vigilance. Count von Salm, hailed as the city's saviour, knows better than anyone that this was no permanent victory. His reports emphasize the fragility of the walls, the desperate shortages of food, the near collapse at the breaches. He insists that unless Vienna modernizes its defenses, the next Ottoman onslaught could end differently. His warnings are heeded. Plans are drawn to replace medieval walls with angular bastions, in the new Italian style, low and thick enough to absorb cannon fire. The siege has made clear that stone alone is no longer enough. Earth and geometry must now protect cities. The citizens rally to the task. Even through winter, when hands are numb and supplies scarce, labour continues. Stones are quarried, timber hauled, moats deepened. Every hammer strike feels like defiance. Vienna has tasted the edge of annihilation, and it will never again leave itself so vulnerable. The effort is not only military but communal. Men, women and children alike contribute, binding the city tighter together through the shared memory of survival. The psychological scars run deep. Children wake in the night crying out phantom cannon blasts. Women recall the terror of standing on walls pouring boiling pitch on attackers. Men bear wounds from pikes and muskets, limping reminders of the fury endured. Yet these scars become badges of honor. Survivors tell their stories with pride, framing their suffering as proof of Vienna's chosen role, the bulwark of Christendom. Already the language of myth grows, blurring hardship into legend. Across Europe, the legend spreads. In German cities, pamphlets describe Vienna as the city saved by God's hand. In Italy, painters render images of angels guarding the walls. In France and Spain, priests preach that unity against the Turk is possible, if only rulers will embrace it. Even England, distant from the immediate threat, hears tales of Vienna's miraculous defence. For a continent riven by Protestant-Catholic strife, the story becomes a rare, unifying myth, if only for a moment. But in Hungary, the legacy is darker. The land between Vienna and Constantinople remains a wasteland, contested by Habsburgs and Ottomans alike. Villages burned during the siege are not rebuilt. Fields lie untilled, their farmers dead or fled. Bandits roam freely, feeding on a countryside too exhausted to resist. For Hungarians, the siege brought no glory, only ruin. Vienna may celebrate survival, but Hungary continues to bleed. Here's your cheeky aside. Imagine being a Hungarian peasant, hearing sermons in Vienna about God's great mercy. You might mutter, "That's nice, but his mercy seems to have skipped my farm." which is now a pile of ashes. History often crowns heroes in cities while forgetting those trampled in the fields. Suleiman, back in Constantinople, does not publicly brood. He frames the campaign as a partial success. John Zapolia remains his vassal in Hungary. Ferdinand has been weakened, and the Ottomans demonstrated their reach into Central Europe. Yet privately the sting of failure lingers. The great Sultan who toppled Belgrade and Rhodes, who shattered Hungary at Mohacs, has found a wall he could not break. Chroniclers spin excuses, but history remembers differently. For the first time, Suleiman's ambition has been checked. The Ottoman court absorbs the lesson as well. The logistical nightmare of the march has revealed limits. Armies of such size cannot be sustained so far from bases, not through rain and frost, not across hostile lands. The empire remains mighty, but it must rethink its reach. Expansion into Central Europe will continue, but the dream of sweeping into Germany, perhaps even to the Rhine, is set aside. Instead, focus shifts back to the Balkans, the Mediterranean, and Persia, arenas where supply lines are shorter and climates more forgiving. Vienna has drawn an invisible boundary. For the Habsburgs, the victory is a windfall. Ferdinand strengthens his hold on Austria, portraying himself as the guardian of Christendom. Charles V uses Vienna's survival as proof of divine favour, rallying support for his wars elsewhere. Yet even amid triumph, divisions remain. Protestant princes, though relieved at Vienna's defence, remain suspicious of Habsburg ambitions. Unity against the Ottomans proves fleeting. Religious wars resume, and Vienna's glory cannot dissolve Europe's deeper fractures. Still, Vienna itself embraces its role. Songs and chronicles glorify the defenders, turning merchants, peasants, and mercenaries into heroes of myth. The battered walls become sacred, each crack a reminder of defiance. Children grow up hearing of their city as the shield of Europe, their identity forged in the fire of 5029. This narrative will endure, shaping Vienna's self-image for centuries. The siege also transforms warfare. Engineers across Europe study Vienna's defence, noting the importance of earthworks, countermines, and disciplined sorties. The lesson spreads. Medieval walls are obsolete, and cities must adapt to the age of gunpowder. The next generation of fortresses, bastioned and angled, will owe their design partly to Vienna's desperate improvisations. War itself evolves because of this siege, and so the winter of 1529-30 settles into history. For Vienna, it is a season of recovery and pride. For the Ottomans, a time of reckoning. For Europe, a moment of hope amid division. The siege has ended, but its consequences ripple outward, reshaping politics, warfare, and identity. Vienna has stood, and in standing it has altered the balance of the world. You stand again on the ramparts, the snow crunching beneath your boots, the plain beyond silent at last. Where once banners of the crescent fluttered, only crows wheel over abandoned trenches. The cold air carries no drumbeats, no war cries, only the quiet breath of a city that has survived. Vienna endures, scarred but resolute, its place in history secured. The years following the siege of 1529 see Vienna slowly transformed from a vulnerable medieval city into a fortress of the modern age. The urgency of survival lingers in every council chamber, every guild hall, every prayer offered in the cathedral. Memories of Ottoman drums thundering on the plains and janissaries swarming breaches haunt the people. They know the siege was not the end but merely a reprieve. Vienna has withstood one storm, but another will come, and preparation must begin immediately. Engineers from Italy, masters of the new science of fortification, are summoned to Austria. These men, schooled in the lessons of cannon warfare that had already reshaped Italy's city-states, sketch designs for angled bastions, deep moats and low earthen walls capable of swallowing artillery fire. The sharp corners of the Trace Italienne replace the crumbling medieval towers. Work begins at once, with citizens pressed into labour alongside soldiers and hired masons. Stones are quarried, earth hauled by cartload, timber dragged from forests. The city becomes a construction site, echoing with the sound of hammers and picks. The scars of the siege are not just healed, They are built over with stronger armor. Life within the city adjusts to its new role. Merchants, though their shops were battered, thrive on the influx of workers and materials. Inns fill with engineers, soldiers, and craftsmen, their conversations dominated by talk of walls and defences. Priests continue to preach Vienna's divine mission as the bulwark of Christendom, reinforcing morale even as they solicit donations to fund the works. Children play in piles of dirt excavated for moats, their laughter carrying a strange echo of resilience. Vienna lives, but it lives with a constant awareness of the enemy that may return. The Habsburg court leverages Vienna's survival for political gain. Ferdinand I emphasizes that his dynasty, not local lords or distant princes, saved Europe from Ottoman conquest. He petitions for more funds, more soldiers, more authority to defend against the next assault. Though Protestant princes remain wary, Vienna's endurance strengthens his position, giving him credibility as the guardian of the empire's eastern frontier. The Holy Roman Empire may remain fractured, but Ferdinand emerges as the indispensable defender. Meanwhile, Suleiman turns his attention elsewhere. The setback at Vienna does not destroy his ambition, but it teaches him limits. Campaigns in the Mediterranean against the Spanish and Venetians, and wars in Persia, draw his focus. Still, the memory of Vienna gnaws at him. Chroniclers in Constantinople spin tales of near victory, blaming mud and frost. But even in triumphs elsewhere, the spectre of that failed siege lingers. For the first time in his reign, the Magnificent has met resistance he could not crush. The psychological effect of Vienna spreads across Europe. Before 1529, the Ottomans seemed an unstoppable tide. Belgrade, Rhodes, Mohacs, all had fallen swiftly. After Vienna, Europeans begin to whisper that the tide can be turned. Soldiers speak of the Sultan not as invincible, but as vulnerable to weather, to fortifications, to courage. For a continent battered by division, the hope is intoxicating. The siege has not unified Europe permanently, but it has offered a rare glimpse of what resistance can achieve. Inside Vienna, the legend grows. Chronicles glorify Count von Salm, painting him as a modern Leonidas who held the gates of Europe. Songs tell of women pouring boiling water from the walls, of priests carrying relics to the breaches, of children fetching stones for the defenders. Some of these stories are exaggerated, some invented outright. But truth matters less than symbolism. Vienna becomes not only a city but a story, a place where ordinary people performed extraordinary feats. The myth fuses with identity. For Hungary, however, the aftermath is bleak. The land remains contested, its villages charred, its peasants ground between Habsburg taxes and Ottoman raids. John Zapalia continues as Suleiman's client king, his authority dependent on Ottoman favour. Hungary becomes a frontier zone, a buffer where two empires bleed each other while common people suffer. The glory celebrated in Vienna does not reach the Hungarian plains, where survival remains tenuous. Here's your cheeky aside. Imagine being a Hungarian farmer overhearing Viennese merchants boasting, "We saved Europe." You might mutter, "That's lovely, but while you were saving Europe, my barn burned down and my cows were stolen again." History has a way of celebrating walls while forgetting fields. The Habsburgs nonetheless press their advantage. Ferdinand strengthens his control in Austria and Bohemia, using Vienna's defence as proof of divine favour. Charles V trumpets the city's survival as a victory for his reign, even though he was nowhere near it. Across Europe, monarchs cite Vienna as evidence that God supports their struggle against the Turks. Propaganda flourishes, weaving the siege into a larger story of Christian destiny, but the Ottomans do not vanish. Raids continue along the frontier, harassing villagers, capturing prisoners, seizing crops. Skirmishes flare in Hungary, sieges erupt at border fortresses, and both empires pour resources into the struggle. Vienna may be safe for now, but the war is far from over. Every villager near the frontier knows that another Ottoman column could appear on the horizon at any moment. The siege has ended, but the contest remains eternal. As the years pass, Vienna rebuilds in both stone and spirit. Its walls grow stronger, its people more confident, yet beneath pride lies vigilance. Bells ring not only for prayer, but as alarms during drills. Soldiers garrisoned in the city drill daily, muskets cracking on practice fields. The citizens accept their fate. They live at the edge of empire, forever a target, forever a shield. Their identity fuses with defiance, their city with survival. The Siege of 1529 thus becomes more than a single episode. It is a turning point, shaping not only Vienna's destiny, but Europe's perception of itself. The Ottomans remain vast, the Habsburgs remain divided, but the myth of inevitability has cracked. Vienna stood, and in standing it proved that even the greatest empire can be held at bay. The legacy of those weeks endures in stone, in story, in the very heartbeat of a city that learned to live with danger as its constant companion. You walk the ramparts years later, the new bastions rising around you, earth packed firm, stone angled against the sky. Beyond the walls, fields once blackened by fire, now shimmer with wheat. The horizon is empty of banners, but the memory of them never fades. Vienna endures, and in its endurance, it reshapes the world. The decades after 1529 reveal the long shadow of the failed siege. Vienna does not forget the thunder of Ottoman guns, nor the sight of Janissaries scaling its walls. Every scar remains visible, etched in stone and memory. But the city also grows stronger. In the years that follow, its fortifications evolve into some of the most formidable in Europe, a living response to the terror of that autumn. What was once a medieval town perched on the Danube becomes a fortress capital, bristling with bastions and earthworks, a symbol of endurance forged in fire. Count Niklas von Salm, the old commander whose resolve had steeled the city, does not live long to enjoy the glory. He dies in 1530, still hailed as the saviour of Vienna. His name becomes legend, woven into chronicles and ballads, remembered as the man who stood when all expected collapse. His death itself is folded into the myth of Vienna's survival, proof that sacrifice, even in victory, is inevitable. The city that he defended honours him, his funeral a spectacle of gratitude. Yet his warning lingers. Vienna must always be ready, for the Ottomans will return. The Habsburgs heed his warning. Ferdinand spends vast sums on strengthening Austria's eastern frontier. Fortresses along the Danube are rebuilt, garrisons expanded, supply depots stocked, taxes rise to pay for it, and complaints ripple through towns and villages. But fear of another Ottoman march silences much opposition. The siege has proven the stakes. Better higher levies than to watch Janissaries batter gates once more. Ferdinand knows that prestige gained from Vienna's survival must be matched by vigilance. Meanwhile, Hungary remains the hinge on which everything turns. After Mohacs, the kingdom has been ripped in two, one half under Ottoman suzerainty through John Zapolia, the other claimed by Ferdinand. This division ensures constant war. For Hungarians, it means endless misery. Armies tramp back and forth, fortresses besieged, villages raided, peasants conscripted or enslaved. Hungary becomes the anvil between Habsburg hammer and Ottoman hammer, neither side relenting, neither side caring for the people crushed in between. Suleiman, though frustrated by Vienna, still commands victories. In 1532, he launches another campaign into Austria, but the season and Ferdinand's fortified lines force him to halt at Koseg, a tiny fortress defended by only a few hundred men. The garrison's stubborn resistance further erodes the image of Ottoman inevitability. Again, Europe breathes easier. Vienna, though spared a second siege, watches closely, knowing its reprieve is never permanent. The psychological shift is profound. Before 1529, the Ottomans were the terror of Europe, a force sweeping all before them. After Vienna, they are still feared but no longer seen as unstoppable. This matters enormously. Fear had paralyzed princes, silenced resistance, and bred despair. Now, courage blossoms. If Vienna can hold, perhaps other cities can too. If Suleiman can be checked, perhaps Christendom can resist. The siege thus reshapes the mental battlefield as much as the physical. Inside Vienna, the legend grows richer with each telling. Children learn of women carrying stones to the walls, of priests parading relics under cannon fire, of peasants standing shoulder to shoulder with mercenaries. The memory is less about nobles and commanders than about unity, a whole city fighting as one. Whether embellished or not, the stories become identity. Vienna is not merely a capital, it is a shield of Europe, the guardian at the frontier. But the frontier remains restless. Ottoman raiders continue to strike into Austria and Moravia, burning crops, capturing prisoners, carrying terror into villages. The Danube frontier becomes a constant theatre of war, with small forts and watchtowers dotting its banks. Soldiers live in a state perpetual readiness, waiting for the next column of horsemen to appear. For peasants, survival means vigilance, keeping weapons close, hiding valuables, praying that the next raid passes by. The siege has ended, but the conflict never does. Here's your cheeky aside. Imagine being a Viennese child in the 1540s. Your bedtime stories aren't fairy tales. They're about grandfathers hurling stones at janissaries. Instead of dragons and knights, you hear about cannonballs and breaches. Childhood itself becomes a rehearsal for vigilance. Every tale a reminder that walls must always hold. In Constantinople, Suleiman's court remembers Vienna with bitterness, but does not dwell on it. Victories elsewhere sustain the Magnificent's image. Campaigns in Persia, triumphs at sea with admirals like Barbarossa, dominance across North Africa. Yet Vienna lingers like a wound that will not heal. The Sultan never again pushes so boldly into Austria. The memory of rain, mud, and frost curbs ambition, even if no chronicler admits it. The empire turns its gaze outward, but Vienna remains the frontier that could not be broken. The Holy Roman Empire, though fractured by religious conflict, also carries Vienna's memory. Catholic preachers proclaim it, proof of divine favour, while Protestant pamphleteers, though distrustful of Habsburg motives, still celebrate the city's survival as a victory for all Christians. For once common ground exists, Vienna becomes a symbol across confessional lines, invoked in arguments that unity is possible, even if that unity remains fragile. By the 1550s, Vienna is transformed physically and culturally. Its fortifications bristle with new bastions. Its population swells with migrants seeking protection. Its merchants thrive on trade routes secured by Habsburg armies. But beneath prosperity lies vigilance. Bells toll, not only for worship, but as alarms for drills. Guards patrol day and night, and rumours of Ottoman movements ripple Vax taverns with every caravan from the east. The city has learned to live with danger, turning anxiety into identity. And so the siege of 5029, though brief in duration, casts a shadow, stretching across decades. It is not remembered as a single battle, but as the moment Vienna became eternal sentinel. Its scars remind citizens daily of their role, to stand, to resist, to guard. The Ottomans may still loom vast, the Habsburgs may still struggle, but Vienna has defined itself in stone and story. You stand again on its ramparts, years after the siege, the new fortifications gleaming in fresh-cut stone, the moats filled with clear water. Beyond, the fields wave with wheat once more, but the memory of fire lingers. The silence of the plain feels deceptive, as though the drums could begin again at any moment. Yet the city breathes easier, knowing that it has already endured the storm once and can endure again. By the middle of the 16th century, Vienna has grown into more than just Austria's capital. It is the psychological frontier of Europe itself. Every decision made in its council halls, every stone laid on its fortifications, carries the weight of survival. The memory of 5029 is never far from anyone's mind. Children who once crouched in cellars as cannonballs shattered walls are now grown, telling their own children how close death had come. The city's very identity has fused with the idea of resistance, and the word Vienna across Europe has become shorthand for endurance in the face of overwhelming force. The physical transformation of the city continues at a fevered pace. Engineers reshape its defences into an intricate star of bastions, their angular geometry designed to deflect cannon shot. Ditches are widened and filled with water diverted from the Danube. Gatehouses are rebuilt with killing zones, designed to funnel attackers into narrow corridors bristling with musket fire. Every new tower, every fresh earthwork is a promise to the citizens. Vienna will not be caught so vulnerable again. The expense is immense, the labour backbreaking, but no one protests. The siege taught too harsh a lesson for anyone to forget. Life within the city hums with both pride and tension. Merchants thrive on Vienna's new reputation, selling goods to soldiers, engineers, and travellers. Inns overflow with foreign visitors eager to see the city that defied Suleiman. Priests continue to preach that Vienna is chosen by God, a fortress of faith against the infidel. At the same time, drills become part of daily life. Bells that once rang only for prayer now summon citizens for practice musters, reminding everyone that peace is fragile, vigilance eternal. Ferdinand leverages the city's survival to strengthen his dynasty. He expands Habsburg authority in Austria and Bohemia, portraying himself as the man destined to defend Christendom. His letters to allies emphasize Vienna's role as Europe's shield, persuading princes to send funds and troops for future defense. His prestige grows even among Protestant rivals, who, though wary of his Catholic zeal, acknowledge that without Habsburg leadership, Vienna might have fallen. The siege becomes not only a military memory, but a political asset, woven into the dynasty's claim to destiny. For the Ottomans, the memory is more complicated. Suleiman continues to wage wars with brilliance, defeating Persians, dominating the Mediterranean, expanding deep into North Africa. But Vienna remains the one campaign where ambition outstripped possibility. In Constantinople, chroniclers insist that nature alone denied victory, that frost and mud, not Habsburg courage, stalled the empire. Yet in whispers, soldiers admit the truth. Vienna stood because it fought. That realization seeps into Ottoman strategy. Never again does Suleiman push so far into Central Europe. His successors will raid besieged border towns, even threaten Vienna again in 1683, but never with the same reckless confidence. The broader European balance shifts subtly, but permanently. Vienna's survival convinces many that the Ottoman tide has crested. Where once kings and princes cowered, they now plot resistance. Spain redoubles its naval campaigns in the Mediterranean. Italian states invest in new fortresses. The Holy Roman Empire, though still fractured by religious strife, sees Protestant and Catholic pamphleteers alike celebrating Vienna's stand. It is one of the rare events of the century that both sides of Christendom can claim as theirs. Inside Vienna, the myth of 1529 seeps into culture. Ballads are sung of women carrying stones to the ramparts, of priests blessing soldiers under cannon fire, of Count von Salm holding the breaches. Painters fill altarpieces with images of angels guarding the city walls. Even the marketplace echoes with the legend. Merchants name inns after the siege. Taverns boast murals of defenders hurling boiling pitch on janissaries. History becomes memory, and memory becomes identity. Vienna is not just a city that survived, it is a city sanctified by its suffering. And yet, the frontier remains dangerous. Ottoman raiders continue to probe Hungary, burning villages, enslaving peasants, carrying terror into the countryside. Vienna may be safe behind its walls, but the land around it is never at peace. Refugees continue to stream into the city, swelling its population, each telling tales of fire and loss. The siege of 1529 has ended, but the war of attrition grinds on, decade after decade. For Hungarians especially, Vienna's pride feels distant. Their fields remain battlefields, their lives cheap in the struggle of empires. Here's your cheeky aside. Imagine being a Hungarian farmer in 1550 listening to Viennese nobles boast about saving Christendom. You'd likely mutter, "That's very fine, but who's going to save my goats from the next raiding party?" For many, the siege was not a miracle, but a prelude to endless hardship. Still, the legend outpaces the reality. Across Europe, Vienna's defiance is remembered while Hungarian suffering is forgotten. The story is simplified into a neat tale. A noble city stood firm, a mighty sultan was repelled, and Europe was saved. The truth that weather, hunger, and sheer chance played as large a role as courage is blurred. Myth is always tidier than history, and Vienna's myth becomes irresistible. For the Ottomans, the campaign exposes the logistical limits of empire. No matter how vast an army, supply lines over hostile, waterlogged terrain collapse. No matter how fierce janissary discipline, Men cannot fight on empty stomachs. No matter how magnificent a sultan's ambition, mud and frost do not bend to will. Vienna demonstrates that expansion has boundaries, even for the greatest power of the age. Those boundaries will shape Ottoman policy for a century, defining what is possible and what is not. By the late 1500s, Vienna's bastions gleam, its population grows, and its pride deepens. The city becomes a symbol of defiance, not just in military terms but cultural ones. Music, art, and literature all reflect its role as the sentinel of Europe. Children are raised not only to remember the siege, but to embody its lessons. Vigilance, unity, sacrifice. The siege of 1529 has ended, but in spirit it never leaves the city. And so the legend endures. Vienna, scarred yet unbroken, the city that turned back Suleiman the Magnificent. Its walls may crumble and be rebuilt, its people may live and die, but the memory remains. The siege is more than a battle. It is a story of survival that reshaped empires, defined identities, and carved a line across history. You stand again upon the ramparts as evening falls, the Danube glinting in fading light. The fields outside lie calm green with crops, but beneath them sleep the bones of thousands who marched under the crescent. The air is still, yet heavy with memory. Vienna breathes. Vienna endures. Vienna remembers. Its place in history is secured, not as a conqueror, but as the city that refused to fall. As the 16th century draws to its close, the legend of 1529 hardens into something larger than memory. Vienna becomes not only a fortress, but a symbol, invoked in sermons, treaties, and chronicles as proof that Europe can withstand the greatest empire of its age. The Habsburgs the story until it gleams, presenting their dynasty as the ordained defenders of Christendom. Protestant pamphleteers, though still hostile to Habsburg power, nonetheless cite Vienna's survival as proof that God does not favour the Turk. Even in divided Christendom, the name Vienna carries the aura of deliverance. Within the city itself, the story becomes a civic religion. Annual processions commemorate the siege, with relics displayed and hymns sung in gratitude. Survivors of the battle, scarred and aged, are paraded as living saints. Children are taught that their city stood when all Europe trembled, that their bloodline carries the duty of vigilance. The battered walls become sacred sites, each crack and patch remembered as a relic of endurance. The myth fuses with daily life, inseparable from identity. The frontier beyond, however, remains a place of torment. Raids by Ottoman Ikinci light cavalry continue year after year, burning villages, enslaving peasants, and stealing livestock. The Hungarian plain becomes a perpetual battlefield, scarred by endless skirmishes. Vienna may celebrate its survival, but for peasants in borderlands, the war never ended. They endure famine, taxes, and violence, their suffering largely invisible to the great courts that trumpet Vienna's defiance. For them, the siege is not legend, but the start of decades of misery. Ferdinand and his successors use Vienna's prestige to tighten their grip on Central Europe. They levy new taxes, build new fortresses, and consolidate authority, justifying every demand with the reminder of Ottoman threat. Resistance is difficult when citizens know that to refuse may invite annihilation. Vienna's survival thus becomes a tool of governance, transforming fear into obedience. Yet beneath the politics lies a real truth. The Ottomans remain close, their shadow always at the frontier. The Ottomans, meanwhile, adapt. Though Vienna remains out of reach, the empire consolidates Hungary, builds garrisons, and controls trade routes. Suleiman's successors inherit both his glories and his frustrations. They raid and besiege border fortresses, keeping pressure constant. The dream of storming Central Europe lingers, but Vienna has proven it is no easy prey. The empire learns to live with limits, even if its chroniclers refuse to admit them. Culturally, the siege shapes imagination across Europe. Artists paint heroic visions of the defense, priests blessing defenders on crumbling walls, citizens hurling stones onto armored janissaries, angels hovering above ramparts. Writers embellish tales of miraculous interventions, relics glowing with divine power, Ottoman minds collapsing by the hand of God. The siege becomes not just history but theatre, performed in pulpits and marketplaces, turning terror into spectacle. Vienna becomes myth, a canvas onto which Europe projects its fears and hopes. Here's your cheeky aside. Imagine a Viennese child in the 1580s listening to these tales. "So, Grandpa, you threw boiling pitch on the Janissaries." Grandpa sighs, "Well, actually, I was hauling buckets of dirt all night." But the song sounds better. History is always neater in retelling than in living. The memory of 5029 also reshapes warfare. Across Europe, military engineers study Vienna's defense, recognizing the power of earthworks and countermines against artillery. Cities rush to modernize, replacing medieval towers with bastions angled to deflect cannon fire. The siege becomes a case study in resilience, influencing fortification design from Antwerp to Krakow. Vienna's suffering becomes a lesson written in stone, guiding an entire continent's military evolution. But the Habsburgs' triumph is tempered by division. Even as Vienna is celebrated, the Holy Roman Empire sinks deeper into religious conflict. Protestant and Catholic states eye each other with suspicion, and when war erupts later in the century, the memory of Ottoman threat is not enough to preserve unity. Vienna stands as symbol of what could be achieved together, but Europe proves unwilling to heed its lesson. By the 1600s, Vienna is a fortress city, girded with bastions, its population swollen, its culture vibrant. Merchants thrive on trade routes secured by Habsburg soldiers. Musicians, painters, and scholars flourish, drawing inspiration from the city's identity as the sentinel of Europe. Yet, the vigilance never wanes. Bells ring for drills, soldiers patrol walls, citizens know that peace is fragile. The story of 1529 has become a habit, shaping not only pride but behavior. To be Viennese is to live always with the expectation of another siege. The Ottomans, too, keep Vienna in their gaze, though they turn their energies toward Persia, the Mediterranean and North Africa. They never forget the city that defied them. The failure of 1529 festers, an insult to be avenged. For over a century, the dream of storming Vienna remains alive in Ottoman councils, passed from one sultan to the next. The memory of retreat through mud and snow demands reversal, and the empire prepares for the day when it will march west once more. Thus Vienna's survival in 1529 becomes not an ending, but a beginning. It sets the stage for a century and a half of tension, raids, skirmishes, and border wars. It fixes Vienna as the focal point of Europe's eastern frontier. The city everyone watches. The city everyone fears may fall. Its legend strengthens resolve. Its myth inspires courage, but its reality is ceaseless vigilance. You stand again on Vienna's ramparts in the late 16th century, the bastions solid beneath your feet, the Danube flowing steadily below. The fields beyond are quiet, but the silence feels deceptive, as though drums might begin again at any moment. The memory of 1529 hangs in the air, woven into every stone, every prayer, every heartbeat. Vienna has endured, but endurance is never final. The siege lingers as both triumph and warning, its echoes stretching far into the future. By the 17th century, the legend of the 1529 siege has matured into a foundational myth for both Vienna and the Habsburg dynasty. The city is no longer remembered as a vulnerable medieval town saved by fortune, but as a bastion chosen by destiny. In the minds of Europeans from Lisbon to Krakow, Vienna is the fortress that stood at the hinge of history. This identity shapes every aspect of its life. Children learn the story as scripture, priests invoke it as proof of divine favor, and rulers wield it as justification for power. What began as desperation has hardened into permanence. Vienna is the sentinel of Christendom. The fortifications embody that role. By the early 1600s, Vienna's bastions stretch outward in angular lines, star-shaped and formidable. Their moats deep and their walls thick with earth and stone. The Italian engineers' designs, inspired by the lessons of 1529, have transformed the city into a model of modern military architecture. Walk along the ramparts now, and you see more than walls. You see a system, a machine built to absorb cannon fire and bleed an attacker dry. It is a fortress not merely to withstand siege, but to project confidence. The scars of Suleiman's cannonballs have been buried under layers of geometry. Life in Vienna reflects the same vigilance. Markets bustle, music fills taverns, scholars debate in halls, yet always beneath the hum of daily life runs an undercurrent of watchfulness. Bells ring for drills, militias muster in squares, watchtowers scan the horizon. The people live with one eye on the east, never forgetting that another siege is possible. Pride mingles with unease, for memory is both shield and burden. To be Viennese is to carry the story of 1529 in your bone. For the Habsburgs, the siege remains political gold. Charles V is long gone, Ferdinand is gone, but their descendants still invoke Vienna's survival as proof of divine election. Pamphlets and paintings celebrate the dynasty as Christendom's defenders. The empire, fractured and quarrelling, nonetheless rallies at least in rhetoric around the story of Vienna. The siege becomes a weapon in propaganda wars, a way to demand taxes, justify authority, to silence dissent. When Protestants balk at Catholic rule, Habsburg envoys remind them that without Vienna, the Ottomans might already sit in their cities. The argument works, sometimes grudgingly, sometimes not at all, but always, Vienna stands as symbol. For the Ottomans, the siege lingers differently. Official chronicles continue to downplay the failure, pointing to weather and mud as villains. Yet the memory festers in the empire's military imagination. Janissaries who froze and starved whisper bitterly of futility. Strategists acknowledge, even if quietly, that Vienna exposed logistical limits. And yet, the dream does not die. The shadow of 1529 becomes a challenge to be answered, a humiliation to be avenged. For over a century, Ottoman rulers nursed the ambition of returning to Vienna, of finishing what Suleiman could not. The memory of retreat through snow becomes a spur, a vow unfulfilled. Meanwhile, the frontier remains a place of fire. Hungary suffers endlessly, its fields trampled by Ottoman and Habsburg armies alike. Villages burn, peasants are enslaved, castles rise and fall in a cycle of violence that never ends. For Hungarians, the story of Vienna as saviour feels distant. They endure the reality of being buffer, the land where two empires grind each other's ambitions into peasant bones. While Vienna thrives on its legend, Hungary bleeds for it. Here's your cheeky aside. Imagine being a Hungarian villager in 1620, hearing Viennese nobles recite songs about saving Europe. You'd probably mutter, "That's wonderful, but could Europe maybe save me from another Ottoman tax collector?" The line between legend and life is often cruel. Still, Vienna's role resonates across Europe. Even in England, far from Ottoman threat, pamphlets retell the siege as a victory for all Christendom. In Spain, it is cited as proof that God blesses Habsburg arms. In Italy, it inspires architects to strengthen cities against cannon. Vienna becomes less a place than an idea, a shorthand for resilience. It is the city that taught Europe that the Ottomans could be resisted. The psychological effect remains profound. By the late 17th century, this idea collides with reality. The Ottomans return in 1683, marching once more to Vienna's gates, with a massive army. The city, now fortified, faces the storm again, and once again, against odds, it endures. But the seeds of that later triumph were sown in fear. The first siege taught the lessons that made survival possible the second time. Without Suleiman's failure, Vienna might not have been ready half a century later. History builds on itself, each scar preparing for the next wound. The legacy of 1529 also shapes how Europe sees itself in relation to empire. The Ottoman defeat is not absolute, but it marks a boundary. The Ottomans can dominate the Balkans, Hungary, the Mediterranean, but Central Europe remains out of reach. Vienna's survival defines the line, the psychological frontier as much as a physical one. For centuries after, maps of Europe are drawn with Vienna as the hinge, the place where East meets West, where empires clash and civilizations define themselves. Inside Vienna, life flourishes even amid vigilance. Music blossoms, composers, musicians, and scholars draw inspiration from the city's dual role as fortress and capital. Markets thrive on east-west trade, bringing spices, silks, and stories from the Ottoman world. Ironically, even as the city defines itself against the empire, it benefits from its proximity. The memory of the siege is bitter, but the cultural essence that continues in its wake enriches Vienna immeasurably. The city becomes not only a shield, but a crossroads. Generations later, the story of 1529 is retold endlessly. Some details shift, heroes become larger, miracles more dazzling, defeats glossed over, but the essence remains. Vienna stood. Parents tell children of walls that would not fall. Priests remind congregations that God answered prayers. Rulers invoke the siege to justify power. History becomes myth. Myth becomes identity. For Vienna, the siege never ends. It lives in memory, in ritual, in the very stones of the city. And so, as centuries pass, the autumn of 1529 continues to echo. The thunder of Suleiman's cannons fades. But the story grows louder. The mud that swallowed Ottoman wagons hardens into metaphor. The snow that froze soldiers becomes a symbol of divine intervention. Vienna carries these memories forward, reminding the world of the city that would not yield. You stand on its ramparts in the quiet of evening. Centuries later, gazing across fields once filled with banners. The air is calm, the Danube flows steadily, but the silence is heavy with history. Beneath your feet lie the stones patched after bombardment. The earth once shaken by mines. The place where citizens and soldiers alike swore not to surrender. Vienna endures, not only as a city, not only as a fortress, but as a memory that reshaped empires. The siege of 1529 is long over, yet in story and in spirit, it has never ended. The city is quiet now. The cannons have fallen silent. The trenches beyond the walls are filled with snow, and the long echo of Suleiman's drums has faded into memory. You stand on Vienna's ramparts in the stillness of night, the air cool and calm, the Danube glimmering faintly in the moonlight. Where once there was fire and terror, there is only peace. The stones beneath your feet, scarred by battle, feel steady and eternal, reminders that storms pass and walls endure. Close your eyes and breathe in the stillness. Picture the fields outside the city, not as they were, torn with trenches and littered with ladders, but as they are now, blanketed by quiet snow, untouched, serene. The plain stretches endless and soft. No banners, no armies, only the hush of winter. The fear that once pressed against these walls has dissolved into the night, leaving only the rhythm of your breath, steady and calm. Let the memory of the siege fade into gentler shapes. The rumble of cannon becomes a distant roll of thunder. The cries of soldiers soften into the rustle of leaves. Even the clash of steel becomes the faint ringing of bells. Far away, lulling you toward rest, history itself quiets, its sharp edges worn smooth by time, leaving only lessons and whispers. You are safe here. The walls are strong, the city endures, and the night stretches soft around you. The magnificent Sultan has long since ridden east, and the people of Vienna sleep in peace behind their bastions. The danger has passed, only calm remains. So drift now, slowly, gently, into sleep. Let the story close its gates behind you. The siege is over, and your dreams are safe within these walls. Good night. Sweet dreams.